But I'm going to make love to you, and then you won't be able to go.
Yeah, but what will they say back there?
You don't like me at all.
Well, like is a very feeble word. No?
I'll bet you do have one. A boy like you is bound to have somebody.
Hollywood loved its glitter. But behind the blinding lights, a darker truth stalked its brightest stars. AIDS wasn't just a disease, it was a storm that stole legends while the world whispered in silence. These weren't forgotten extras. They were icons, rebels, and trailblazers. So here's the question. How many names do you really know from this tragic roll call? Stay with me, because the stories you're about to hear will leave you breathless. Freddie Mercury. The man, the myth, the thunderbolt wrapped in velvet, Freddie Mercury was not just Queen's frontman, he was a living explosion. With a voice that could leap from opera to hard rock in a heartbeat, he turned stadiums into temples of sound. Crowds didn't just watch Freddie perform, they surrendered to him. Every stomp, every note, every flash of that mischievous smile was pure fire. But away from the roaring crowds, Freddie faced a brutal reality. Diagnosed with HIV in 1987, he lived in silence, pouring his energy into one last act of defiance: music. Albums like Innuendo carried hidden goodbyes, layered in lyrics and soaring vocals. And who can forget the haunting video for These Are the Days of Our Lives? With just a look into the camera, Freddie said farewell without words. In November 1991, he passed away at just 45, but his death ripped open the silence. Suddenly, AIDS wasn't just a whispered rumor. It was front-page news. In the aftermath, the Mercury Phoenix Trust was born, channeling his legacy into global awareness and funding. Freddie's life wasn't defined by illness, but by the way he transformed the stage into a universe of sound and freedom. Even now, press play on Bohemian Rhapsody, and you'll hear it. That defiance, that brilliance, that refusal to be forgotten. Freddie Mercury didn't just sing, he conquered time. Rock Hudson. Tall, charming, impossibly handsome, Rock Hudson was Hollywood's dream man. The leading star in films like Giant and Pillow Talk, he embodied the perfect romantic hero. For decades, audiences swooned while his posters covered bedroom walls across America. He was the picture of strength, class, and charm. But in 1985, the world's dream shattered. Rock Hudson revealed he was battling AIDS. The announcement wasn't just shocking, it was seismic. Suddenly, a disease many dismissed as distant and invisible had a face, and not just any face. It was Rock Hudson, the ultimate symbol of American masculinity. The news sent a jolt through Hollywood and beyond. Suddenly, AIDS couldn't be brushed off or ignored. Rock's courage forced headlines to shift, governments to act, and conversations to begin. In a time when silence was safer, he chose honesty. His passing that same year marked the start of a turning point. Funding poured into research, advocacy exploded, and the world began to realize that AIDS didn't discriminate. Rock Hudson's legacy wasn't just his films, it was the way his truth pierced through the walls of stigma. When people talk about the faces that changed public awareness forever, Rock Hudson stands at the top. He was the hero who finally made the world listen. Liberace. If excess had a name, it was Liberace. Picture sparkling rhinestones, crystal candelabras, capes so heavy they needed assistance just to lift them. He wasn't just a pianist, he was an event. His shows were pure spectacle, transforming classical music into theater, fantasy, and glittering magic. Audiences adored him. He was untouchable, larger than life, a living jewel of entertainment. But behind the curtain, Liberace lived under constant scrutiny. Rumors followed him, but he fiercely guarded his private life. Lawsuits, denials, and carefully crafted illusions kept the press at bay. Even as whispers grew louder in the 1980s, Liberace maintained the facade, insisting everything was fine. When he passed away in 1987, his death certificate listed pneumonia, but the truth soon emerged. It was AIDS. For someone who spent his life dazzling crowds with sparkle, his final chapter was cloaked in secrecy. Today, his story feels tragic, not just because of the illness, but because of the silence. The man who could fill arenas with joy couldn't publicly share his struggle. Still, his influence is everywhere, from Elton John's stage theatrics to Lady Gaga's flamboyance. Liberace showed the world that performance could be unapologetically grand, even if the person behind the sequins carried battles unseen. His legacy? Pure showmanship. And maybe a reminder that even the brightest rhinestones can hide shadows. Anthony Perkins. Norman Bates. The name alone chills the spine. Anthony Perkins' portrayal of the eerie motel owner in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho changed cinema forever. With a nervous smile and haunting charm, Perkins turned horror into art. Hollywood had crowned its new master of suspense, but Perkins himself lived a life far more complicated. In an era when Hollywood demanded conformity, he carefully guarded his truth. He was shy, soft-spoken, deeply private, always dodging personal questions, always careful. Off-screen, his relationships remained whispered rumors, hidden in the shadows of an unforgiving industry. In the late 1980s, whispers grew into tragedy. Perkins had contracted HIV. True to his nature, he kept his diagnosis private, continuing to work even as his health declined. In 1992, just days before his death, he released a statement. AIDS, he said, was the most frightening illness of the 20th century. His passing struck fans like a thunderclap. How could the man who terrified us all on screen be quietly enduring a nightmare behind closed doors? Anthony Perkins' story is a sobering reminder that fame doesn't shield you from stigma. He may always be remembered as Norman Bates, but the truth is this: Perkins was more than a character. He was a man trapped in a world that never let him fully be himself. And in that silence, the cost was enormous. Robert Reed. For millions of families in the 1970s, Robert Reed was America's dad. As Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, he was the calm, wise, ever-patient patriarch who made everything better by the end of each episode. He was the man viewers trusted, a television father figure who shaped childhoods across the country. But Robert Reed's real life was nothing like the Brady living room. Off-screen, he was a deeply private man, carefully shielding his personal world. The contrast between the beloved TV dad and the man himself was stark. When Reed passed in 1992, the truth came out. His death certificate revealed he was HIV positive. For fans, the revelation was shocking. The friendly, smiling father of 6 had been living with a secret illness the whole time. In many ways, Robert Reed's story is one of quiet tragedy. He played America's most trusted parent, yet couldn't live openly in an industry that demanded silence. His death forced audiences to confront the fact that AIDS was everywhere, even in the seemingly untouchable world of wholesome television. The legacy of Robert Reed is bittersweet. On one hand, he gave us a character who made millions feel safe. On the other, his real story highlights the heavy burden of keeping up appearances in a world not ready for the truth. His smile was warm, but his silence was heavy. Brad Davis. Brad Davis was the kind of actor who burned through the screen. His breakout role in Midnight Express, 1978, turned him into Hollywood's rebel, a raw talent who embodied intensity. The film, based on a true story, earned him a Golden Globe and cemented him as the face of fearless acting. Davis wasn't interested in being polished. He was electric, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Yet behind the charisma, his life unraveled in private. In 1985, Davis was diagnosed with AIDS. At the time, admitting such a thing could end a career overnight. He kept it secret, working as long as his health allowed, delivering roles packed with fire even as his body weakened. Friends later recalled his refusal to let pity define him. He wanted to be remembered as an actor first, not as a patient. By the early 1990s, his health deteriorated. In 1991, Davis made the choice to step away from the pain, leaving behind his wife and daughter with a legacy of bravery and artistry. His decision shocked many, but it also underscored the brutal weight of the disease in an era when effective treatment was still out of reach. Brad Davis's story remains one of brilliance cut short. His work in Midnight Express still feels like lightning in a bottle, raw, dangerous, and unforgettable. He was the rebel who refused to play safe, and even in silence, his career left an impact that time can't erase. Rudolph Nureyev. Ballet had rules, and Rudolph Nureyev shattered them all. Born in the Soviet Union, he defected to the West in 1961 in a daring airport escape that made headlines worldwide. Overnight, he became both a political symbol and the most talked-about dancer on Earth. His performances were pure power, explosive leaps, commanding presence, and artistry that made ballet sexy, dangerous, and alive. Nureyev wasn't just a dancer. He was a phenomenon. Teaming up with ballerina Margot Fonteyn, he created one of the most legendary partnerships in stage history. Audiences gasped, not just at his technical brilliance, but at his raw magnetism. He didn't simply dance, he defied gravity and expectation. But even icons bleed. In the 1980s, Nureyev was diagnosed with HIV. He continued performing, choreographing, and directing even as the illness ravaged him. His last years were a battle between body and spirit. On stage, he was still the master. But offstage, he endured endless treatments and declining health. When Nureyev died in 1993, the ballet world was devastated. Yet his legacy endured. He had transformed dance forever, proving that strength and elegance could coexist in the male body, reshaping how audiences saw performance itself. Rudolph Nureyev didn't just move to music, he made art rebel. His fight against AIDS, carried with the same fearlessness he brought to the stage, remains a testament to the power of refusing silence. Howard Ashman. You may not know his face, but you know his words. Howard Ashman was the lyricist behind Disney's Golden Revival. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, those unforgettable songs of longing, love, and transformation came from him. His writing wasn't just clever, it was soul-deep. He gave Disney characters heart, voice, and timeless resonance. But Ashman's brilliance came under siege by an enemy he couldn't outright. In the late 1980s, while working with Disney, he was diagnosed with AIDS. Quietly, he continued to work, even as the disease wore him down. During recordings of Beauty and the Beast, he was already frail, yet his lyrics carried a power that outlived him. Part of your world, be our guest. Prince Ali. These weren't just catchy numbers. They were stories of outsiders yearning for acceptance, echoes of Ashman's own struggle woven into melodies children would sing for generations. Howard Ashman passed away in 1991 at just 40 years old, before Beauty and the Beast became the first animated film nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Disney dedicated the movie to him. His name appears at the end, a quiet acknowledgement of the man who gave their Renaissance its soul. Howard Ashman proved that music could be magic even in the face of despair. His work still whispers, still sings, still inspires. And that's how a genius becomes immortal. Pedro Zamora. Reality television had never seen anything like him. In 1994, Pedro Zamora appeared on MTV's The Real World, San Francisco. He wasn't just another castmate. He was a Cuban-American activist living openly with AIDS, turning primetime TV into a classroom. Millions of young viewers who had never even heard real discussions about the illness suddenly found themselves face-to-face with it through Pedro's bravery. Pedro didn't hide. He spoke candidly about the challenges, the stigma, and the reality of living with HIV. He educated not by lecturing, but by sharing his fears, his hopes, his daily battles. When he held a commitment ceremony with his partner, Sean Sasser, it was broadcast to millions. For many, it was the first time they saw love and resilience in the face of AIDS. His courage reached far beyond MTV. Even President Bill Clinton praised his work, acknowledging how much Pedro had done to raise awareness. For young people, Pedro was living proof that AIDS wasn't a headline. It was a human struggle. Tragically, Zamora passed away in November 1994, the day after the season's finale aired. He was just 22. But his impact was seismic. Pedro Zamora showed the world that honesty could be revolutionary. His story turned television into activism and left a legacy far bigger than the show itself. Wade Dominguez. Wade Dominguez burst into Hollywood like a firecracker. Starting as a dancer, he carried an intensity that caught eyes everywhere he went. His breakout came with the 1995 film Dangerous Minds, where he played Emilio Ramirez alongside Michelle Pfeiffer. Audiences were captivated by his raw, vulnerable energy. He wasn't just acting, he was exposing his soul on screen. But Wade's promising career was haunted by a devastating diagnosis. He had AIDS, a truth he kept private. Friends and co-stars said he refused to let the illness define him. To the world, he was a rising star, not a headline of tragedy. In his final days, his friend Elizabeth Berkley visited him, bringing a copy of his last movie, The Taxman. As he watched himself on screen, frail but still luminous, Wade whispered, "I'm so good." Those words were heartbreaking, because they were true. He had the talent, the drive, and the spark. What he didn't have was time. Dominguez passed away in 1998 at just 32 years old. The loss wasn't just of an actor, it was of a career that could have soared to unimaginable heights. Wade's story is a cruel reminder of how many lives were stolen at the moment they were beginning to shine. His flame burned fast, but it burned brilliantly. Paul Shenar. In Scarface, one man stole scenes without needing a machine gun. Paul Shenar, as Alejandro Sosa, was the smooth, calculating drug lord who terrified Tony Montana with just a glance. That cold charisma came from a true craftsman. Shenar wasn't chasing celebrity headlines, he was chasing craft. Off-screen, he was a theater man, a classically trained actor who believed in the work, not the spotlight. But like so many in his era, his story ended under the heavy shadow of AIDS. Diagnosed in the late 1980s, he kept performing while his health slipped away, delivering every role with quiet intensity. When he died in 1989, at just 53, the news didn't dominate tabloids. But ask any Scarface fan today, Sosa remains unforgettable. Shenar's artistry wasn't loud, but it left a scar in cinema that endures decades later. Paul Shenar may not be a household name, but his work proved that great acting doesn't need neon lights. It just needs truth. Denholm Elliot. You've seen him, even if you didn't know his name. Denholm Elliot was Marcus Brody in Raiders of the Lost Ark, a steady, warm presence in one of cinema's most beloved franchises. He popped up in Trading Places, A Room with a View, and countless British films. He wasn't the leading man, he was the character actor who quietly made movies better just by showing up. But behind the steady performances, Elliot carried a private battle. In the late 1980s, he was diagnosed with HIV. Rather than retreat, he kept working, maintaining the same professionalism that earned him the respect of peers and audiences. When he passed in 1992, the industry mourned a man who had built his career on consistency and dignity. The British Academy honored him with a BAFTA, recognizing a life's work built not on glamour, but on pure dedication to the craft. Denholm Elliot's story is a reminder. Not every hero has to stand in the spotlight. Some legends shine brightest in the background. Steven Stucker. If you laughed through Airplane, and let's be real, who didn't? You remember him. Steven Stucker played Johnny, the fast-talking, outrageous controller who stole every scene with one-liners so sharp they're still quoted today. He was pure comic electricity, a spark that lit up the screen. But Stucker did something even braver than comedy. In 1984, at a time when AIDS was whispered in shame, he went public with his diagnosis. One of the very first actors to do so. In a world terrified into silence, Steven spoke up. He cracked jokes, yes, but also shattered stigma with raw honesty. His openness cost him work, but it also inspired others to break their silence. He proved that humor could be a weapon against fear. Steven Stucker passed in 1986 at only 38, but every time someone quotes Airplane, every "Don't call me Shirley" that gets a laugh, remember the man who made courage funny. Cliff Gorman. Long before Broadway was mainstream cool, Cliff Gorman was already breaking molds. In 1968, he originated the role of Emery in The Boys in the Band, a play that dared to center gay characters unapologetically. Gorman's performance was loud, flamboyant, and fearless, decades ahead of its time. Though he later gained fame in films like The Boys in the Band movie adaptation and Angel, it was his stage work that set him apart. He wasn't afraid of roles that pushed boundaries, but the spotlight couldn't protect him from the shadows. Gorman contracted AIDS and died in 2002, though his illness was long kept private. For a man who embodied boldness on stage, his final chapter was marked by quiet struggle. Cliff Gorman left behind a legacy of bravery, proof that playing roles some considered too risky could actually change the landscape. Without actors like him, modern theater wouldn't be the same. Franklin Seals. If you watched 1980s television, you remember him. Franklin Seals played Dexter Stuffins on Silver Spoons, the butler with sharp wit and charm. He had that rare ability to turn a supporting role into a fan favorite, stealing laughs and hearts without breaking a sweat. Seals trained at Juilliard and had range beyond sitcoms. He appeared in Star Trek, the motion picture, and serious stage roles. Critics noted his precision, his commitment, his quiet star power. Yet his career was tragically brief. Diagnosed with AIDS, Seals fought in silence. In 1990, he died at only 37. His passing shocked co-stars and audiences who had no idea he was ill. Franklin Seals wasn't given decades to build a long resume, but in the time he had, he proved that talent didn't need years to make an impression. He made his mark quickly, and it still lingers. Michael Jeter. Remember the quirky assistant coach Herman Stiles on Evening Shade? Or the gentle prisoner Delacroix in The Green Mile? That was Michael Jeter, an actor who specialized in characters that were odd, tender, and unforgettable. Jeter had a gift. He could make the smallest role feel human, layered, real. Audiences adored his eccentric energy. He even won an Emmy and a Tony, proof that Hollywood and Broadway both recognized his brilliance. Behind the applause, though, was a struggle. Jeter was diagnosed with HIV but continued to work tirelessly. He refused to let the illness dictate his story. In fact, in 1997, he gave an interview where he openly addressed living with HIV, insisting he wouldn't hide who he was. Michael Jeter passed away in 2003 at 50. His cause of death was heart complications, but he had lived with HIV for years. His story is one of resilience, a man who brought joy, quirk, and depth to audiences while quietly carrying an enormous burden. When you watch The Green Mile, notice the kindness he radiates. That wasn't just acting, that was Michael Jeter, leaving a legacy of heart. Alan Bowne. He wasn't a movie star, but his words packed the same punch. Alan Bowne was a playwright who tackled the gritty corners of New York life in the 1980s. His play 40 Deuce was raw, confrontational, and so striking it caught Hollywood's attention. It was adapted into a film directed by Paul Morrissey, starring a young Kevin Bacon. Bowne had a knack for exposing the underbelly of society. He wrote with edge, with fire, with fearlessness. Critics hailed him as one of the most important voices of the downtown theater movement. Then came AIDS. Diagnosed in the late 1980s, Bowne kept writing even as his health collapsed. His later play Beirut was a haunting metaphor about disease and isolation, a clear reflection of his personal battle. He died in 1989 at just 44. Too young for a man whose pen still had decades of fire left. Alan Bowne's legacy remains in the words he left behind, sharp, painful, and brutally honest. His plays still cut deep, reminding audiences of the era's struggles and the people silenced too soon. Craig Russell. Craig Russell was Canada's master of transformation. A female impersonator before drag hit mainstream television, he built a career out of uncanny impressions. From Judy Garland to Bette Davis, his performances were so sharp that audiences often forgot they were watching an impersonation. In 1977, he starred in Outrageous, a film loosely based on his life. It became a cult hit, praised for its humor and heart. Suddenly, Craig Russell wasn't just a nightclub performer, he was an international star. But fame couldn't shield him from the epidemic sweeping through his generation. Diagnosed with AIDS, his health deteriorated quickly in the 1980s. He passed away in 1990 at only 42. Craig's life was one of bold artistry. Long before drag was celebrated on global stages, he proved it could be art, it could be theater, it could be profound. His courage to step on stage, transform, and captivate remains an inspiration for performers who followed. Craig Russell lived outrageous and left a legacy just as bold. Klaus Nomi. If aliens started a cabaret on Earth, Klaus Nomi would have been their headliner. This German countertenor arrived in New York's art scene in the late 1970s, like a visitor from another planet, costumes straight out of sci-fi, vocals that soared from operatic highs to punk rock edges. He was bizarre, mesmerizing, unforgettable. David Bowie noticed, inviting Nomi to perform with him on Saturday Night Live in 1979. Suddenly, Klaus was no longer underground. He was a sensation. But Nomi's otherworldly brilliance was cut short. In 1983, he became one of the first well-known figures to die of AIDS. He was only 39. His death shocked New York's art scene, a cruel reminder of how the disease was erasing entire communities of talent before they had the chance to fully bloom. Today, Klaus Nomi is remembered as a pioneer of performance art, a man who dared to be different when the world didn't understand him. His recordings and surreal videos remain haunting artifacts of genius interrupted. He was proof that sometimes the most human artists come wrapped in the strangest costumes. Tom Fogerty. The name Creedence Clearwater Revival makes you think of American rock staples like Proud Mary and Bad Moon Rising. While John Fogerty fronted the band, his brother Tom Fogerty was there from the start, providing rhythm guitar and helping shape that swamp rock sound that defined an era. But band tension drove them apart. Tom left CCR in 1971, striking out on his own with solo projects. Though he never matched the band's massive success, he carved a steady career as a respected musician. In the 1980s, Tom contracted HIV from a blood transfusion. The news remained private, but his health worsened steadily. By 1990, he was gone at just 48. Tragically, Tom and John had remained estranged until the end. John later admitted regret, saying they never reconciled before his brother's passing. That wound still echoes in the band's history. Tom Fogerty's story is bittersweet, part of one of the greatest American rock groups, yet gone before his time. His rhythm may not have been as famous as the lead guitar, but without him, Creedence wouldn't have had its backbone. Willie Smith. Fashion in the 1980s was loud, bold, and unforgettable. And nobody embodied that better than Willie Smith. He wasn't just a designer, he was a revolutionary. His brand WillieWear redefined style, blending high fashion with streetwear before streetwear was even a buzzword. Oversized blazers, graphic tees, and clothes that actually felt alive, Smith made fashion for everyone, not just the elite. His designs dressed dancers, artists, even superheroes. He believed style wasn't about exclusivity, but about identity, freedom, and joy. Critics called him one of the most influential black designers of his generation. But tragedy hit fast. In 1986, Smith's business partner died of an AIDS-related illness. Only months later, Willie himself fell ill. At just 39, he passed away quietly, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance cut short. Though his name isn't shouted in glossy magazines today, his influence still ripples across fashion. Every time you see runway looks echoing street culture, you're seeing Willie Smith's fingerprints. He made fashion democratic, fun, and fearless. And though AIDS silenced him too soon, his colors never faded. Steve Rubell. Studio 54 wasn't just a nightclub. It was the epicenter of wild glamour in the late 1970s, a temple of disco excess where celebrities and dreamers collided under flashing lights. And at the heart of it all was Steve Rubell, the club's co-founder and ultimate gatekeeper. If you got past his velvet rope, you were somebody. Rubell was a master of spectacle, the man who made nightlife into mythology. But away from the champagne-soaked parties, he carried a darker reality. In 1985, he was diagnosed with HIV. He never revealed it publicly, guarding his private life as fiercely as he guarded Studio 54's entrance. By 1989, Rubell was gone at just 45. The king of nightlife, who had once thrown the world's most extravagant parties, died in near silence. His story is a stark reminder that no amount of fame or power shielded anyone from the epidemic. Behind the velvet rope, Rubell faced the same tragedy as millions of others, yet Studio 54's legend still glitters. And every story told about its wild nights is also, in a way, a story about the man who created a world that burned so bright, even if it couldn't last. Keith Haring. Few artists captured the pulse of the 1980s like Keith Haring. With chalk in hand, he transformed New York subway walls into galleries. His cartoon-like figures, dancing babies, barking dogs, radiant hearts became symbols of joy and rebellion. Haring wasn't just an artist, he was a cultural lightning bolt. He used his work to speak truth. Murals, public art, collaborations with Madonna and Grace Jones, his art was everywhere, and it always had a message. He tackled issues of oppression, community, and identity with simple lines that carried enormous weight. In 1988, Haring was diagnosed with AIDS. Rather than retreat, he created even more. His silence equals death imagery became iconic in the fight against the epidemic. His art turned into activism, a weapon against stigma. Haring died in 1990 at just 31, but his imagery has outlived him, splashed across museums, street murals, t-shirts, and protests around the world. Keith Haring proved that art doesn't just hang on walls. It fights, it speaks, it survives. He's gone, but his radiant babies still dance, his barking dogs still shout, and his legacy still glows neon bright. Sylvester. Disco had a queen, and his name was Sylvester. With a falsetto that soared higher than the mirror balls above the dance floor, he turned tracks like You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, into anthems of freedom. His performances weren't just concerts, they were explosions of glitter, sequins, and unapologetic joy. Sylvester was one of the first openly gay disco stars, refusing to tone himself down for anyone. He performed with drag queens, wore dazzling costumes, and turned every stage into a celebration of individuality. His music wasn't just fun, it was liberation set to a beat. In 1988, Sylvester was diagnosed with AIDS. He continued performing until he physically couldn't, pouring everything into his final shows. When he passed in 1988 at just 41, he left a void in disco that could never be filled. Yet his voice never faded. Every pride parade blasting Mighty Real, every dance floor that comes alive with his music, is proof that Sylvester's spirit never left. He wasn't just a singer. He was a movement, one that still echoes every time the bass drops and freedom floods the dance floor. So there it is, 24 names, 24 lives, and 24 reminders that brilliance can burn even brighter in the face of silence. These weren't just celebrities. They were warriors of art, music, film, and truth, lost to a crisis the world once tried to ignore. Which of these stories shocked you most? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and share this video because remembering them isn't optional. It's how their fire keeps burning.